happy birthday to W.E.B. Du Bois, who would have been 158 years young today. So we want to celebrate that beautiful soul.
Yeah.
And welcome to the new people who are here at Race Talk Revolution with Lane and Eugene. Race Talk Revolution with Lane and Eugene is a place where your voice matters. Today, we are wrapping up our Black History Month programming with Catholic theologian and social ethicist and award-winning author Alex Mikulich, who will speak to us about the lessons in his latest book, Unlearning White Supremacy, a Spirituality for Racial Liberation. Now, as always, during our conversation today, we ask that you please remain muted. And when we get to the question and answer section, we will instruct you on how to raise your hand and get into the queue. Now, because these conversations are so rich and our guests, our speakers are so knowledgeable with what they bring, we encourage everyone to limit the use of the chat during their conversation. And then we also want to have you, when it's time for you to do the Q&A, we want to have you activate your camera if at all possible, and then express your questions and comments at that time. And I will remind you again at that time when you ask your question or comment, please try to keep that under a minute so that we have time to get through everyone. We also would like to remind everyone that Race Talk Revolution is a loving, inclusive platform designed to strip away false beliefs that keep us separated as human beings, uncover the not so hidden truth that we all truly want the same things in life, and then to heal the wounds created by systemic racism. Race Talk Revolution is a safe and brave space for people of all backgrounds to share ideas and opinions, and then also to explore the nuances of systemic racism, while at the same time together growing our capacity for effective anti-racist activism. The Race Talk Revolution family is committed to practicing radically inclusive love. So what does that mean? That means that when we do not understand or agree with what's being shared or what's being said, we are still committed to listening with respect, listening with appreciation, and listening with empathy. You see, it is our commitment that every person be encouraged, heard, and appreciated. Because here on Race Talk Revolution with Lane and Eugene, every voice matters. Now here is my beautiful co-host, the Reverend Lane Cobb.
Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome. So good to see so many new faces today as well. This is so exciting. Thank you for coming. Maybe you came to hear our speaker. So excited. Welcome, welcome. Alex Mikulich is a Catholic theologian and social ethicist, award-winning author, anti-racism facilitator, and activist. His most recent book, Unlearning White Supremacy, a Spirituality for Racial Liberation, will be published by Orbis Books in June of this year. His previous books include The Scandal of White Complicity in the US, Hyper-Incarceration, a Nonviolent Spirituality of White Resistance, and Interrupting White Privilege, Catholic Theologians Break the Silence. That book won the 2008 Theological Book of the Year Award. Alex's scholarship and essays address the intersection of modernity and coloniality, anti-Black white supremacy, and living interspiritually with all of our human and non-human kin so that the entire web of life may flourish and thrive. Talking my language, I love it. Talking my language. Welcome to Race Talk, Alex. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Reverend Lane and Reverend Eugene. So delighted to be here. And ultimately, my book is about the radical love that you witness to, because there's only one earth, one life, one love that we all share. And that's the ultimately, all of us, I hope, will join in that struggle. But my work is focused on preliminary work new work I think that white folks need to take up in terms of unlearning the untruths that we've been malformed in over the last 500 years. And that's the critical work of the book, stated in a sentence.
Thank you. You've taken a lot of heat over the years for calling out the Catholic Church for its racist history. And I know this is a big part of your work, of your scholarship. Can you tell us about your inspiration for bringing this message? And in a moment, then we're going to want to find out some definitions, probably, of what you're talking about.
Yeah, so this is a work that it's not primarily, it doesn't come from like me being in a library. It's not primarily academic. It's really based in experience in the Black Catholic Church. And I'm really indebted to many Black Catholics in parishes in San Francisco and Hartford and New Orleans. And I draw extensively in the book on specific theologians like Sean Copeland and Brian Massengale, who've been a great inspiration to me. I really started this work in the early 90s when I was serving as a lay pastoral associate at a Black Catholic parish in San Francisco. And I used to serve a group of about a dozen Black Catholic women in a Bible study group. And in that group, I really became a student to them. While I provided some knowledge of biblical exegesis, I was really a student to them. And that's where this journey really started for me.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So I need to ask you, what were you learning? What did you learn? Because that's an extraordinary statement right there.
Well, it's where I first learned about the reality today of lynching. Women in that group would talk about memories of trauma such as lynching. That to me was, as a privileged white guy, I was completely ignorant of that reality. And so part of it was just learning about that. Another part of it was, I was educated growing up in Michigan that Black folks were lazy, but in this parish, those folks were the foundation of the neighborhood. They were taking care of everybody from the youngest to the oldest, the sickest, the most vulnerable. They were really practicing the gospel in a way I haven't seen anywhere else in my life. So it was a complete reorientation of my whole way of looking at the world.
Wow. So, Alex, I would also want to say thank you for being here. When you speak of, racial liberation, what does that mean for you? And what does unlearning white supremacy look like?
Yeah, so, to put it in simple terms, ultimately what I'm talking about is so that all human and non-human can thrive. That's the simplest way to put it. But then in terms of unlearning anti-Black white supremacy, what I'm talking about is this isn't about like pointing at individual racists. This is about a larger collective and communal work that white folks need to take up to to look at how over the last 500 years, we've been malformed by what we call modernity and its oppressive side of coloniality. So that means, like, for example, and I want to interrelate, like I could get into this. I have a chapter where I get into W.E.B. Du Bois on double consciousness. And, you know, and another person who does similar work is Franz Fanon. And he warns, and I warned white folks in the book to be careful about claiming that we believe in universal dignity and universal human rights, and yet we don't deal with the arsenal of complexes of white superiority and everything that entails. So what I'm talking about is that faith communities need to take up a common work of unlearning the untruths that we have been malformed in. And that means working through assumptions that we have that we are superior, that we're innocent. We have to work through the benefits that we've assumed of safety and power and privilege. So there's a great deal for us to work through as a part of entering into a struggle for racial liberation that also involves, and my hope for people of color is that they can be freed of what Fanon called the arsenal of inferiority complexes, and that people of color can also be freed from the violence that we've been perpetrating for 500 years in multiple forms, not just in the original suicide and genocide that formed the Americas, but in ongoing systemic police and vigilante violence, for example, and every sphere of life in the Americas and our society is violence. And so liberation is about freedom from, especially for Black folks, of having to deal with the threat of death as being something near every single day and structured into our entire society. You know, so the system is destroying all of us. It's also destroying the planet. Yeah. So that's why I said originally that the liberation is ultimately for us to be freed from these complexes of inferiority and superiority and the violences that we continue to perpetuate today.
Yeah. So Alex, this is your third book, and we can tell that you are very passionate about your work here, you know, and bless you for doing this work. I have a question. Who inspired you? What inspired you to do this? Who inspired you? Who and what?
Yeah, so in addition to Black Catholics who Kara and I have worshiped with in different cities and over the last 30 years, in addition to those folks, I've also been very much inspired by our children. I think I've told you a little bit about, I can tell people about adopting cross-racially. And that has been a really critical experience to learn about the the violence that I was talking about before, because my own family has experienced threats because we're an integrated family. And I've been particularly inspired by my children who are teaching me continually about what double consciousness really means. And, you know, we could not really be responsible parents if we were not faithful to Black Catholics who, you know, called us out to take up anti-racism as a way of life if we are going to parent Black children. And I think that that's not just something that I should do, but something that predominantly white communities of faith should be taking up as a way of life.
So I wanted to stop and I wanted to say a couple of things. Frank Fanet, is it F-A-N-E-T? Because I'm going to claim ignorance.
No, Fanon, Franz Fanon.
I didn't think, okay, thank you. I didn't think that I heard you correctly. I want to be able to put that in the chat. And also, you know, maybe tell us a little bit about double consciousness, because that's a concept some people might not be familiar with. So tell us a little bit about that, please.
Yeah, so, you know, let me put this in context. I often hear you know, I've been doing anti-racism facilitation for over 15 years. And something I often hear from white folks is they say, you know, I want to listen to what Black people have to say. And one of the things that I'm amazed by is that white folks do not read W.E.B. Du Bois on the souls of Black folks. And also he later wrote a chapter on the souls of white folk. And I think that double consciousness, what he does with that is really a gift. And it's a gift because it invites us into understanding the violence that he experiences internally is one part of it. But then he also invites us to see ourselves as others see us. It's a way of seeing how we are perpetuating violence in this society. And we need that insight in order to do the work that we need to do. And then enter into a full struggle for liberation.
So you talk about needing to transform white consciousness and what you want white people to know. What do you want people of color to know?
I have a chapter on reparations. I have two chapters actually, and drawing upon you know, Christian gospels, basically saying that the first need to become last and the last need to become first. And for people of color, my hope is that they can connect with ancestors who they've been disconnected from, that they can find healing and repair from the trauma of slavery and genocide and traumas inflicted daily in our society. And so ultimately, for people of of color to experience repair and healing, and to be able to thrive in the way that you want to live.
So there's a lot for all of us to learn. And I know that, we could talk about this all day because there's a lot of layers to these conversations, right? And that's why we're so pleased, Eugene and I, that we get to, bring people together to have these conversations that are hopefully helping to bring some healing to these tough conversations. What do you feel that we all need to learn as human beings in order to move the dial forward here?
Yeah, I mean, so we alluded to, you talked about this in the beginning, and I've talked about it a teeny bit, is I think that one of my colleagues who I've been inspired by, Brian Massengale, he uses a quote from Albert Einstein, and Einstein basically says, you can't change consciousness with the same consciousness that created the problem in the first place. And so what I'm saying about unlearning on truths actually comes from Malcolm X talking to Black folks. And he talked about unlearning untruths. And so what I'm saying is that and I'm not the only person saying this, we need a complete collective transformation of consciousness that starts with questioning the assumptions of modernity, okay, such that in my own faith tradition, we completely ignore that the Roman Catholic papacy was deeply involved in initiating the Atlantic slave trade. And in doing so, it created the beginning of coloniality. Not just colonialism, but when we say coloniality, we mean a whole way of thinking and being in the world. Namely, that we are superior beings to folks in Africa who need to be converted to our way of, our religion, okay? And so what that did was, from the get-go, created a dualistic way of viewing the world. It created a separation. And that separation is still present in modern United States. Here in the United States, in North America, we still colonize Black and brown spaces and bodies. And there's a whole political economy that's based upon segregation and on, I get into depth in the book about both redlining and reverse redlining are ways that our political economy plunders and devastates communities of color. But that's rooted in a deeper whole way of thinking and being. And all of us need to unlearn that and dismantle that system that's killing all of us, and it's killing the planet.
Yeah, there's so much here, Alex. And I've gotten to the point in my life, not my age, because I'm still young, but I've gotten to a point in my life where I'm not ashamed to ask a question that I don't know. And I love words, but I've never heard the word modernity. Can you, and that's just for me, to my own clarity, I was going to go online and try to find out the definition. But so if
Yeah.
you can tell me what that is, please.
Yeah, so just, I mean, we think of ourselves, I mean, the simplest way to put it is, we think of ourselves as being modern people. And there's, there's a whole history of this that we don't have time to get into, but you've heard of, ancient history and the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. And then supposedly there's this thing called modernity. And what modernity assumes is, and with modernity came in democracy. And we talk about progress and democracy and development. Someone has
I found it. It took me a while, sorry.
Okay, sorry. So anyways, it's almost the last 500 years of history that has emerged, and we call ourselves moderns, as if we are advanced from peoples who have lived previously to us, when in fact we actually have to learn from many diverse peoples who've lived previous to us and who are living different ways of life around the planet. In fact, for example, just one example, scientists have linked the protection of biodiversity with linguistic diversity. And yet we call those very societies that really treasure the earth and have ways of living that care for the earth, we call those peoples underdeveloped and not modern. That's wrong. That's messed up. That's in our brains as a way of being in the world that we need to confront.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you. With the work that you're doing in all of this, I know that you've had some pushback, but let me ask you, what kind of feedback have you gotten regarding, your books and the work that you do, and how has that feedback been for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a mix. I think one of the things that I've learned since the publication of Interrupting White Privilege in 2007, one of the critical learnings for me has been understanding that predominantly white institutions are committed to maintaining their power and privilege. And unless we white folks enter into that conflict and name the ways that our institutions perpetuate this system, we're going to remain mired in the violence that we've been talking about. So I guess the key learning for me is learning that there's a depth of commitment to white privilege and power that is to me is now frightening and incredibly dangerous, because that's where the problem is.
Yeah, and going along with that, thank you so very much. There's a question that Dean Usher asked, which I think is a very powerful question. Are enough white Americans willing to unlearn untruths to make a substantial difference? What do you think?
That's why I wrote the book, because I don't think there's enough right now. I think that we've got a great deal of work to do, and there's no time. There's no time to waste. This is why I wrote the book, is to urge white communities of faith and white institutions to take up this work in a more collective, communal, and rigorous way, so that we can lift the burden that Black and brown folks have been bearing for too long.
Yeah. I know we're probably about 10 minutes before our normal Q&A, but there is a queue that is already growing with people who have questions.
Okay.
But before we get there, Lane, is there anything else we want to ask before we open that up?
No, I think we can go ahead with the Q&A. Why not? People are chomping at the bit. And
they are.
Listen, I'm loving what you're saying, Alex, right? There's no time to waste,
Right.
Just absolutely wonderful. So.
What's that I was saying? We've heard it before, right? Now, if not now, when? If not us, who?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. So we have Judith, Norman, Gail, and John. Judith?
Oh my God, I'm so glad I tuned in today, Alex. What you are saying reminds me a lot of what is also in the book. The author reminds me of you too. The Half Has Never Been Told. I'm sure you're familiar with Edward Baptist.
Oh, yes. I draw upon his work in my book. Yes.
Okay, I can hear. It's just resounding. A lot of what you said, and what triggered my hand to go off was when Eugene asked about modernity. What does that really mean? Well, he refers to it in that book because he talks about how African Americans created the modern structures we provided for through our free labor. We provided for the development of the modern of capitalism, of borrowing money through Lloyd's of London. That's how many of the white planters were able to expand their plantations, by borrowing money to purchase human beings. And then when they fell into debt, they sold us without any conscience whatsoever with regards to separating mothers from children, wives from husbands, and breaking up families, because they had to pay for their debt. They owed money to the British banks. And therein lies the foundation for credit building in this country. And for the establishment of Wall Street. African Americans helped to create the systems associated with modernity in this country. And it's just amazing that you would bring that up. What is the name of the book that you wrote? I'm going to go out and get it. Is it at Barnes and Noble?
Well, first off, thank you for citing Edward Baptiste. What you're saying, and my very first chapter is entitled Drawing on James Baldwin. My first chapter is entitled The Presence of the Past. And so when anyone in the United States says that slavery's over, it's in the past, we have nothing to do with it, BS. It's enduring today in multiple forms that we're not aware of, and we need to become aware of and address them. You're absolutely right. because Africans in diaspora were both not only labor, but as you said, also capital, the very foundations of the economic system that we have today. And yet we now have all across the country politicians who are clamoring to close down any discussion of this history,
Yes.
of this reality of who we are and who we've been. So I'm right, you're absolutely right. And my book is entitled Unlearning White Supremacy, and it's not coming out until June
Okay.
from Orbis Books.
Thank you. Thank you.
Pre-order the book now. Real fast, I just was so excited about getting to the Q&A. I forgot to mention and how to raise your hand. So we want to take your cursor down to the lower part of the screen, go over to the right-hand side where it says reactions, click on reactions, and then there's a bar that says raise hand. If it's not there, then go to the participants tab over on the left-hand side and click that, find your name, go to the ellipsis or the more tab, click on that, and you should find it there. Thank you so much. Judith, thank you so very much for your questions and comments. And thank you for being here. Absolutely. Looking forward to seeing you later. Norman, we have Norman, Gail, and then John.
My question has to do with capitalism. I mean, that seems to be the basic problem, capitalism and greed, because it breeds greed. And basically 90 families own all the wealth of this country. That's idiotic. I don't know of another system that allows anything like that. Not only allows it, but almost insists on it. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so it's precisely. So the last chapter of my book is entitled Embracing Ecological Intimacy. And in that chapter, I have a section on the problem of growthism. There are movements actually around the world for what's called degrowth, because our entire economic system, as you mentioned, as you mentioned, there's growing gaps between rich and poor. But additionally, what's also going on is that the system overwhelmingly expropriates labor and resources from the global south to the rich societies of the so-called global north. And there's been extensive studies about this, that whatever aid the United States and other so-called developed nations give to the South, that aid pales to the resources and labor that we expropriate from the global South. So what I was talking about in terms of plunder in the United States, there's also global plunder. You're absolutely right. And that's why we talk about, when I'm talking about modernity, coloniality, we have to recognize that oppression is integral. It's constitutive It's in the DNA of the system that we've built up for 500 years.
So how do you get away from that?
Yes, so that's why. So I just mentioned that could be a whole other session that we could do on ways of, as I just mentioned it, there's a movement around the world called degrowth. It's to get away from capitalism and look at the ways that the earth and ecosystems throughout the planet actually provide enough abundance for everybody to thrive. Okay. And unless we make that shift to those ways of living, the current system is not only creating gaps between rich and poor and creating great distrust across class and racial lines, it's also killing us. It's killing the planet. And unless we move away from that, there's only, as I said at the beginning, there's only one earth, one life that we all share in. And unless we focus ourselves on a shared struggle to focus on that one earth, one life that we share, we're not going to make it.
Thank you. Thank you, Norman, for your questions and comments. And thank you, Alex. Gail, I saw you had your hand up and now it's down.
The only reason I lowered it is that my question was just answered, basically. So I didn't want to take up time asking it again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gail. We have John and then Sarah.
Hi.
Welcome, John.
Hi, thank you so much. This has been really wonderful. Like you, Alex, I come to this conversation as from a Catholic perspective, and so much of what has been said, not just by you, but by everyone who's participating here, resonates with, I think, a basic idea of obviously not just Catholicism, but maybe Catholicism in particular, of the idea that conversion is a way of life. And we're all called to a constant conversion. And that's what following Christ is all about. And it reminds me of the fact that we're about to enter Lent, and we're going to hear that same reading about conversion now, that now is an acceptable time. And my question is what you think the practical steps are to help all of us, but maybe people who are resistant to this idea, to accept that conversion is a way of life, and that conversion on the score of racial justice is indeed an area in which we are all in need of conversion. Because I think clearly there's much resistance to this idea. And I find so painful and puzzling is the way in which white Catholics and Christians in general, who supposedly believe that conversion is a way of life, don't seem to think that, don't feel called to conversion in the way that we're talking about. So I'm curious how you think we can help people of faith, maybe Catholics in particular, to start to think of racial justice as a realm of conversion, or a place in which they are indeed called to conversion.
Okay, that is a great question. And I have a lot to say about it. The first thing, like in terms of the gospel, one of the things I talk about in the book is this notion of crossing over to take sides with and for Black and brown folks. And I'm putting that idea of crossing over in terms of, we talk about salvation history begins with the liberation of Israel from Egypt that involved the crossing over. Also, just for one example, in Christian scripture, the Good Samaritan story. Dr. Martin Luther King, in his very last book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? He takes up the Good Samaritan story to talk about the need to completely transform the entire Jericho road that creates conditions in which people are left for dead on the side of the road, and a society where we walk by without caring for the person left for dead on the side of the road. So in the book, I talk about crossing over in terms of a cluster of spiritual practices that we in white faith communities need to take up. These practices include questioning with Fanon, questioning the assumptions of modernity coloniality, number one. Number two, we need to engage in civil disobedience, Gandhian civil disobedience, as a way of life in support of Black Lives Matter and other movements. Thirdly, lament. We need rituals of lament to take up ritually lamenting every loss of life to police and vigilante violence. These are our brothers and sisters. And until we engage in that level of bodily feeling the pain and suffering and helping to lift that in a shared struggle, we will not be able to change the conditions by which we live in this society. Lament is in scripture and in our faith. Lament goes to the core of what it means to be a person of faith who challenges God and challenges our own, breaks down our own idols and it's only through lament that we can really find true joy with and for one another. And then finally, ultimately, what I'm saying in terms of the gospel is that we are called to a radical dying, radical dispossession of everything that we cherish as white folks. Everything that we cherish as white folks, our imagined innocence, the way that we segregate ourselves, our safety, our comfort, our power, everything that we take for granted are part of its idolization that divides us from our brothers and sisters and from a real God who's calling us to be people of truth, love, and justice.
Amen.
Pass the plate. This is good. This is good. It's interesting, right? How systemic racism touches everything. It was interesting, Alex, earlier on when we first began the show, you said a phrase that my ear heard. I was like, wow, I've never heard it put like that. And it's nothing very big, but I've never heard anything referred to as, white Catholics, Black Catholics. But when you think about it, that's exactly what's going on. Was it Martin Luther King or Malcolm? I think it was Martin who said that Dr. Martin Luther King, who said that Sundays is the most segregated hour in the nation. So when you said white Catholics, it struck me like, wow, I've never heard those two simple words, but that's how deep this goes, right? That it's separated.
Right. Yeah. And to your point, there's James Baldwin talks, he has a mantra, people who believe they are white. People who believe they are white, he says, and he makes it a mantra. You are living a lie. We are living a lie. And that exactly, so that divides us. That language right there, that's division.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. We have Sarah, Fred, Tyrone, and Onaje. Good to see you, Sarah.
Sorry, I had to unmute. I love what you're saying, Alex. I'm a Catholic myself, and the idea of a lament and so on. But I wanted to take the conversation in a slightly different direction around the concept of modernity, because I'm currently really challenged by a conflict, and I would like to explain it to you and see what you think. I grew up as white entitled as anybody, not in this country, but in England. And of course, although the issue of slavery wasn't front and center at all, but English society benefited a lot from that. I'm now, and have been for 50 years, married to a Ghanaian. And so I come into close contact with issues in Ghana, where a country that is chasing modernity as hard as it can, but still retains a lot of traditional practices. And something that happened recently, it's very difficult for me not to cling on to my modernist, if you like, mindset, as opposed to the traditional practice that I'm confronted with, and I'll explain the situation. It's a family we know well. The mother was actually our nursemaid when we lived in Ghana and our children were growing up. And she got into an unhappy marriage, and it ended very, very messily with the father walking out, taking everything with him, and leaving her with the children. Then he dies. Now, custom requires that the family, which does not really include herself, but certainly includes her children, take care of the burial. And as you may know, funeral customs in some parts of Africa are very elaborate and very demanding. And if the family doesn't meet those standards, they are severely judged. So they appealed to us for a little help. We sent a little help. And then the daughter, who is just starting on a professional career, but probably not earning very much money, reached out to us again. And I'm saying to her, Ekwa, you don't owe your father anything. He walked out on you. And she said, well, custom requires it. Now we know she is going to put herself into debt for years in order to finance her father's funeral, as custom requires. So here's where my modernistic instincts say, for goodness sake, cut it out. And yet custom requires it. I wondered what you thought of that situation.
Okay, so I don't know that I can answer your question because my work has been focused in North America, and I don't think I have enough information about what you're talking about to really offer a helpful answer. Is one thing. The next thing is that folks who in movements of decoloniality, one of the things they're saying is they're not saying, it's complicated because they're not saying reject all of the good things that have come up in the last 500 years. So it's a little bit complicated, but then the other thing is I would want to learn, like, to really answer your question, I would have to be immersed with you in that cultural context.
I understand you can't answer the question.
So I'm hesitant to address that question. The work that I'm focused on is the problem of anti-Black white supremacy in the United States. So.
No, I understand you can't answer the question. I just wanted to expose the dilemma of somebody who's trying to confront white supremacy themselves, and then white supremacy and its link to modernity. And where
and I think that we need to, that's part of what I'm saying, is that in the process of the history, we've created these contradictions. We have lots of contradictions to work through that this is, for me, this is a lifelong work because I'm constantly learning my own ignorance.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Sarah. We have Fred, Tyrone, and Ajane next. Fred, welcome.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. I'm particularly Alex. I went to Holy Cross.
Hey, Fred.
Hey, Alex. A little while after Alex, and Alex is really helping us a lot to really understand anti-racism is the work we're doing at Holy Cross with our alumni, College Holy Cross Anti-Racist Association or Alliance. My question for Alex is, who is your targeted audience with this book or maybe your past books, right? Now, I guess I asked that question since, is it this group, where I heard people say pass the plate? It gives more information, more tools, more resources, arm us to have the proper battle, we go out to try to, get people to be anti-racist or see their own ignorance, and or those that are fringes, right? They're not maybe where this group is at, and they're questioning and thinking, and we're trying to get this book into their hands. So I guess who's your target audience?
Thank you, Fred. Good to see you. Yeah, so I was saying earlier, I should step back and say, ever since Kara and I started to prepare to adopt cross-racially, we took up anti-racism. And what I understand that process to be is work that we have to take up as white folks. And ever since then, like the book Interrupting White Privilege, and also the book about hyper-incarceration, is primarily addressed to a predominantly white Catholic community. So it's inviting white folks into this work. And that's where my work has been focused, because that is where my colleagues such as Brian Massengale, Sean Copeland, Black Catholics in parishes where I've lived, and others like Stokely Carmichael and many others have said where you need to do work is in the white community. And so that's where I have focused myself. That's why I'm serving the White Caucus group within the Spiritus Anti-Racism Coalition in Rochester, and other similar processes. So it's primarily addressed to white people to unlearn the untruths that we live by in anti-Black white supremacy.
Thank you. Thank you, Fred, for your question. Thank you for being here. We have Brother Tyrone.
Hey, Alex. One thing I like about you is the pauses that you put between your answers. I think it's very mindful, and I just wanted to compliment you on that. My question's kind of tied into, forgive me, I forgot the brother just spoke, kind of tied into
Fred.
Thanks, Fred. Kind of tied into your point. And I'm just going to say it, it's like I'm tired of this Christian right religious stuff, using religion to justify the perpetuation of racist infused systems. I'm tired of people using Dr. King's quote, about character, the content of character and the color of skin, just tired of it. And that's being used as a justification in this whole anti-CRT, crap that's been running around in social media. It actually feels like things are going in the opposite direction, from school boards to the Supreme Court.
Right.
So I guess part of my question, I think Fred asked, was who's your audience? And I think I got that. It's basically white Catholics. But how do you approach, and this is probably the deeper question for me, how do you approach folks who are turned off immediately when you start using isms? You strike me as a deeply spiritual but intellectual human being. And I heard a bunch of isms in this conversation, and I'm just wondering, how do you get down to the brass tacks of people who maybe they're Catholic, maybe they're not, I don't know, but they're holding on to beliefs that seem like someone is taking something from them, that their pure existence is going to be wiped away just by the multiplication of people of color on the planet. I know you can't answer all that, but it's a concern that I want to get to.
Excuse me. Well, first off, thank you, Brother Tyrone. It's good to be with you here. I always love hearing you and your questions that are so piercing. So let me talk. Can I talk about it? There are a few ways to answer your question. First off, I do name white nationalism, and I think white folks of faith need to name white nationalism as our problem, not pointing the finger and saying it's someone else. We need to take responsibility for that, because our lives depend on us entering the conflict. Number one. Number two, I apologize for my use of isms. In the book, I go into detail describing the realities that here I'm only skimming the surface. I provide in-depth analysis and history. And I think that and to answer your question, we white folks need to do that work to know our history and know the reality in which we live and which we benefit and which we perpetuate. And I didn't talk about, I have a chapter on, I'm sorry, but it's an academic term, white habitus. But basically what white habitus is an ecosystem of segregation and the ways that we white folks are socialized into not being able to empathize with our brothers and sisters of color. We need to face that reality, because the way that we're living, it's killing us and it's killing you. It may be killing us more softly, but it is killing all of us. And if we want to stay hung up on being, that we have to have it this way, that we have to be superior, then we are in deep trouble. So thank you, Tyrone.
Thank you. I do have Najee next. And Adine, I saw your hand up and now it's down. Okay. Najee Muid.
Oh, thank you. Wow. This is as they say, this is deep.
Brother,
Okay.
is it possible for you to come on camera?
Yeah.
I
can. Yeah, thank you so much. This is an incredible conversation. And Alex, for you to have gone through, all the levels of metamorphosis to be who you are, a human, which we all are, right? Is really incredible. I just want to just acknowledge that, number one. Jones, the late Jones, philosopher, theologian, wrote a book called "Is God a White Racist?" I don't know if you read that. So, I'm bringing up him in two ways. One is that you talked about, okay, white people have to stop denying. So when he speaks about oppression, he says what the oppressor will do. He has three denials. He'll deny that oppression exists in the first instance.
Right.
He will then say, well, and then you show that it does, it's happening. Then he'll say, well, it's not me, it's someone else. And then when you show that it is him, what he will do is put in place a change, but not a correction, because the oppression creates discrimination, it creates disabilities, it creates all these ways of lessening the person. So if you don't repair those initial harms, you just go through what he calls neo-oppression. One harm that happened in the last iteration will then determine your reality right now, and that keeps on going. So for you to bring up reparations is such a wonderful thing. I have to get the book. But he also talks, but you also mentioned it was implied, but it didn't come out, literally. And that is this question of xenophobia. White people humans who've been made to become white, because we know there was no such thing before whiteness, between 17, 16, something like that. So the white humans who became white have this xenophobia where they are scared of other people of color, right? So in that, right, I don't know if you can answer this. Do you really think Christians, white Christians who really believe in the Bible, could separate that their savior, Jesus, in fact, was not white? That was Michelangelo's cousin. Can white Christians really separate from the fact that Jesus, in fact, was a black man? He says his hair was of wool, says his feet was of copper. Doesn't sound like a white person to me. So can white people separate the fact that their savior, in fact, was a black man?
Right. I concur with you. I don't know that I can say anything except a couple things. One is, yes, the way that we're living now is idolizing whiteness. It's idolatry.
Let me share with you how deep this is.
Idolatry.
Let me share how deep this is. In Ghana today, Africans will say, if they see a white man walking down the street, they can say, I've seen God, and go back home and say, now I don't have to go to church because I can go back home. That's how deep this thing is. They are saying, I've seen God, and now this fulfills my religious obligation to go to church, and I can go back home. That's how deep this is.
Yeah, and it's also in addition to idolizing whiteness, we also fail to see how, as James Cone talks about in his book on lynching, that Black and brown folks who've been lynched in the United States are Christ in our midst. You know, and as you know, I haven't even talked about it, but I draw upon the work of the Trappist monk Thomas Merton. Yeah. And Merton, he wrote letters to a white liberal in 1963. And what he was saying in letters to a white liberal is that we have to be freed from our idols, but also we have to see you and everyone around us, whether they're Black or brown, is Christ right before us in the flesh. And that's in my faith tradition. Each of us is a representation of Christ. And yet we want to maintain this superiority that divides us from the person who we claim to worship. So you're absolutely right. And I don't have an answer to correct that, but except for what I've attempted to say.
Thank you. Deep, deep, deep.
Eugene, can we have Onaji share the title of the book, please? Someone asked.
Oh, yes, yes,
and
yes.
The author of the book. Or Alex, what was the name and the title of the book?
Is God a white racist?
Okay.
Is that what you were talking about?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And the author?
The last name is Jones. I'm forgetting his first name right now.
I can find it. I can find it.
Onaje put in there.
Okay,
That's
great.
by Bill Jones.
Oh, okay.
Onaje, thank you so very much.
Thank you, sir.
We have Serena, we have Frank, and then again we have Judith. And then I think we'll make Judith the last question. Serena?
Can you hear me? And
yes. Is it? I'm sorry?
I don't have a camera.
Okay,
I
cool.
don't have a camera.
Okay.
So a couple of things. Gail had mentioned in the comments something that I think is really important for white people when we're talking to other white people. Well, first of all, I listened to this really great conversation between John Stewart and Brian Stevenson this past week where they discussed this issue. And John Stewart was talking about the conversations he has with other white people. And what they both pointed out, and Brian Stevenson pointed this out, is that first of all, everyone knows racism exists. Everyone knows racism is bad, whether individually or institutionalized racism. And we've known this forever. Everybody knows it. However, the fact that everybody knows it and everybody knows that it's wrong, has that actually motivated people to change? Has it motivated the people who are in control, such as the white people, to change something that they know is wrong? Unfortunately, it hasn't. So what does work? And I think what works, in just my personal life, I've seen it work. And what Gail pointed out in the comments in the chat here today is stressing that something that's a truth, that white people do not lose anything if racism is eradicated. What we do is we gain from the contribution of others. And I just personally know this because I happen to live in a very richly diverse community here in mid-Michigan, And my life is so rich because we have such wonderful people that live here that look different, that have different faiths, that have come from different families. And I am so, so utterly blessed. But I think that is the argument because it's a truth. And I think that's what we need to stress is the advantage that all of us in this country will receive when we are able to bring out the best in everyone. We need the best in everyone. We've got a lot of big challenges. We need the best in everyone. So that's what I have to say.
Serena, thank you so very much. As Gail said, well said, Serena. Alex, do you have anything to say?
Well, just that I do think that there's a prior problem, and that is the way that we're socialized is to be ignorant. I know that, okay, I grew up in Michigan. I grew up in East Lansing. And, I talk about this in the book. We were trained to be ignorant. We did not, my family watched Walter Cronkite on the news every evening. And we talked about everything on the news, the Vietnam War, everything. But did we take up what Dr. King was saying at the time? No. Did we take up the rebellions in Detroit in 1967 and 68? In fact, my parents watched the rebellion from the bell tower of Don Scotus Seminary, and they walked away from it as if we had nothing to do with that. We saw ourselves as completely separate and innocent. That's a problem that we need to work with, we need to address. And the only way I've been able to work through that is through in-depth anti-racism training and processes.
Powerful, Alex. Thank you.
Brother Frank, and then Judith would be the last question for today.
Alex, you spoke of the colonial period where the white plantation owners would trade off people, and it became a for-profit process in which...
Frank, real fast, is it possible for you to come on camera?
Yes, I'm sorry. I've just been ill today, but I still wanted to participate.
Thank you.
I didn't want to come on camera. But do you think, sir, that there is the possibility that the capitalistic system contributes to racism? In my mind, it's right. In my mind, the rich have, the people who don't have are below them, and the system itself keeps us, number one, separated, poor, and unable to think beyond our system. Because if we really looked at everything critically, we would move beyond our system. People of conscience would move beyond our system. And so if you could please comment to that related to racism, because in my mind, racism, poverty, homelessness, et cetera, many of our social problems come from that.
Yeah, I agree, and we've been talking about that today. One way, I guess, that I could amplify what I've already said is when I was working in Louisiana, we developed a statewide coalition to end predatory lending. And in that work, it was interesting because the strength of our interfaith coalition was people on the ground all over the state, and mostly folks, as you say, like that don't have resources and whose communities are getting plundered by predatory lending. And yet, when I was in the State House, lobbying, the predatory lenders brought in about 50 full-time lawyers to squash our legislation. Okay, that's big time money. I mean, I can't even imagine how much that they were spending to maintain a political economy. It's political that draws resources out of specific communities. That's the way our system works. And when I talk to a lobbyist across the aisle, he said to me, Alex, you win the moral argument, but we win the economic argument.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Judith.
Okay, thank you. Oh, once again, this has just been amazing. This question I'm going to ask, I'm sure could generate a dissertation, but as we are living and living witnesses to intergenerational organizations and groups and efforts across the country now to address racism, this issue, the question I'm about to bring up has come up, and there seems to be a growing debate with regards to the difference between racism and discrimination. There are other groups of individuals who are trying to claim racism, I mean, from my perspective, there's not any system of racism anywhere in the world like the one here in the United States involving African Americans. But there seems to be a trend now towards, saying, well, we're all victims of racism, and I just want to ask you, Alex, what is your perspective in terms of how would you define or delineate the difference between racism and discrimination?
Okay, great question. My book, this book doesn't take up every dimension of different forms of racism. I do discuss the history of genocide of indigenous peoples and the need for us to contend with that reality. But I'm also saying both with indigenous peoples and Black folks that we need to address those independently and uniquely. Okay, so like this program has had people from indigenous, Latinx, different perspectives that we all need to learn from. It's one thing. Another level of your question is the way that I talk about this, that white folks erroneously talk about reverse discrimination. okay? What I'm very clear about in the book is defining anti-Black white supremacy as having, I get into and unpack 4 dimensions of anti-Black white supremacy that include, but is not limited to, it is a whole system of idolatry, idealization is one aspect. Another dimension is the way that it socializes, and we've talked about that today, how everybody is socialized into these complexes of superiority and inferiority. And also it's an economic way of oppression. And I haven't even talked about, but our previous book, and I talk about in the book, is we have, and actually this program has talked before about the way our entire society is a punitive society, and we hyper-incarcerate primarily people of color. We disproportionately incarcerate people of color. And that's one of the ways of neo-colonialism, if you will. So yeah, it's about white supremacy and digging into the dimensions of white supremacy, which I'm not addressing every dimension of racism, which is impossible for one person to do.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. Lane?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Alex. And I am personally going to be sure that we do a book study on your book and get you in front of some more audiences, because everything that you have said needs to be shared over and over and over again. Thank you so much for speaking truth to power and daring to call out the hypocrisy that just is undermining everything that we need as a human race. So thank you, sir. So we hope that you will, first of all, thank you, everybody. We had 79 people on this broadcast today. So Alex, clearly,
81.
81.
Yes.
So thank you. Please come again if this was your first time here.
Absolutely.
And please join us next week for our final session of this Race Talk season, which will be a panel discussion about restorative justice programs in K through 12 education. And that's important. As you can imagine, these folks are busy fighting fires. So please take the time to be here with us. We hope you'll be here. We also want to express our gratitude today to the town of Greenburgh, New York, and to Ms. Judith Faville for honoring Race Talk Revolution with their annual African American History Month Award, for offering an informative and educational forum, providing a space free of blame, shame, or guilt to discuss race relations in America. Judith, we are so gratified. Thank you so much. We're honored. And we thank everyone, all of our supporters and all of you, because if you all did not come, we would not be receiving an honor. So this is just a wonderful thing. So this honors all of you. So thank you. I want you to know that. We want you to know that. Eugene.
All righty. Again, thank you. We are so honored. And again, to really reiterate what Lane said, if it weren't for you, we wouldn't be here. So thank you for showing up consistently every week, because as we say consistently, right, healing happens in community. And this Race Talk Revolution community is so powerful. So thank you so very much. we want to let you know about an upcoming workshop that we're doing March 19th. It is What Is Ours to Do? It's a wonderful, wonderful workshop that we've done a couple of times, and we're continuing to get this out here. It is really learning about what you will learn is how to deal with the discomfort of talking about race in your families, communities, and organizations. You will address the dehumanizing effects of racialization that alienate us from our fellow human beings. In this workshop, you will deepen your connection with your faith, your sense of purpose, and your personal call to action. And one more, you will learn how to create a plan for how you can become the change you want to see in the world. You can register for this workshop at www.racetalkrevolution.com/events. If you have any questions or comments and anything, you can contact us at info@racetalkrevolution.com. That again is info@racetalkrevolution.com. In terms of the workshop, there is a limit because it's online and we want to make sure that we can see everybody at the same time. So the limit is 22. The workshop, 6 hours, is very affordable, but don't wait. Just go to the website and sign up. Thank you so very much. We love you guys so very much. Thank you for showing up and showing your heart, not only to us and not only to your Race Talk Revolution family, but showing your heart to your community where you live and where you work. Thank you so much. Together, we will heal this.
And one more time, I just want to thank and acknowledge Alex Mikulich. His book is Unlearning White Supremacy, A Spirituality for Racial Liberation, will be published by Orbis Books in June 2022. Alex, any last words from you, sir?
Let's live out a radical love of race talk revolution.
Yes. Really, one more time, the website is www.racetalkrevolution.com. Yes, yes, yes. As Virgie says, yes. Thank you, everybody. Peace and blessings.
See you next week, guys. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.